So today's topic is classroom libraries, specifically for personal finance or financial literacy, what to include, how to fund it, and more. So excited to have all of you here. And let's go ahead and dive into the topics that we're going to cover. Financial literacy books, and I use financial literacy there in quotes, using books in the classroom, our new online catalog, and building your own personal or classroom library, I should say. So before I get too far, over in the chat, check that area out. Dr. Kevin Curry is going to share a link to our handout. So hopefully you can access that over in Google Drive. I will also be sharing a PDF of this afterwards once the webinar is archived over on our website. This has a list of all of the books that I'm featuring today, as well as links that would take you to the current Amazon link to a version of that. So go ahead and download that or visit that later for a way to grab some of these. And again, I'm going to be flying through and talking about a lot of books. I didn't even count the number of books, but there's a lot of them. So, which is actually the whole concept of a lot is part of that book study that we're going to have coming up as well. So anyhow, go ahead and open that up if you want, or make a note to download that later. So what do we think about when we think about financial literacy books? And it's interesting because some of you who know me or have known me for a while know that I tend to actually stay away from the term financial literacy because I don't actually usually like to associate it with the opposite, which is the notion of being illiterate. But I think it works well when we talk about literacy and reading. And so with that, I put together a list of lots of different books that are sort of germane to the topic of personal finance. And I've divided them out in some different categories. And so I'd like to encourage all of you to think about different kinds of books that you might think about and different ways to use them. So we'll start off, this is my own financial literacy library. This is a section of my bookshelves here in my office. So you can see I have lots of different personal finance books, which are sort of up top are my picture books, chapter books. I've got all sorts of nonfiction books for teens, books for parents, textbooks and workbooks, and then just sort of books on general topics. And when I took these pictures, now I'm regretting that I didn't put some more back on the shelves because some of these are sideways. But anyhow, there are a lot of books out there, and it's certainly can be overwhelming when you want to sort of think about what you might want to start with a collection. And so in this first section, I'm going to share with you just a whole host of different books that you might pick from, and again, in sort of different categories. So kicking things off, I want to start with books that are intended for adults, but certainly will work in a classroom with high school students. And so these are some books that have been around for a very long time and are very popular for teachers to use with students. And I want you to think about these in sort of two ways. So one is a classroom library for your students to be able to read and select books from. And the other is, quite frankly, some of these are also fantastic books for us as educators to read to make sure that we have a good grasp on content if we need it, or even just to think about a different way to present a certain topic. Maybe you are trying to think about how you talk about a topic or want to think about alternate ways to explain something. Reading some of these books can help us to just sort of expand the way that we talk about some of the things that we're teaching about in our classrooms, or just expand on our own personal knowledge or to increase sort of that depth of our content knowledge. So these are ones that have been around for quite a while. The Wealthy Barber, The Millionaire Next Door, and The Richest Man in Babylon. The Richest Man in Babylon is often one that teachers like to use for full group for the entire class to read because it is quite short and has a very doesn't take very long for students to read and or can be read as a read aloud in class. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is another one that is quite popular, and as is the index card. So this is a really interesting book that sort of talks about like simplifying things. You know, like if you were to try and put everything you need to know about money onto one index card, what would be on that card and why? And so that's another good one. This the I Will Teach You to Be Rich is now in its second edition. This is also another one that's quite popular with teachers for students. As with all of these, and I'll hit on this again later, you want to pre-read some of these these books or all of these books, just to make sure that the content is going to be okay and appropriate for your students. So like if you see on the front cover of this one, it says, you know, no BS, right? So you just want to make sure that, you know, it's okay for the level and of your students and the community in which you live, and you know, that nothing in here is going to be a red flag for any of your administrators or parents. So anyhow, all of these are great books, and I'd love for you over in the over in the chat area, if I mention one book that you've read and that you have some personal, you know, experience with, or, you know, if you, so, you know, how many of you, for example, have read The Millionaire Next Door? So if any of these are books that you've read personally and would care to share, you know, say like, you know, thumbs up for Richest Man in Babylon, love it, or what have you, please feel free to share that over in the chat. As a reminder, if you're using that chat feature, there's a drop down there. It defaults to hosts and panelists, so that means only Kevin and I can see it. So change that default over to everyone, and that way you can see, everybody else can see your comments there as well. So would love for folks to pipe in if there's any of if any of these are your favorites as well. This is a quote by a children's author that I appreciate. Reading is important because if you can read, you can learn anything about everything and everything about anything. And I like that sort of notion. You know, we often talk about, and they use the benchmark a lot of times of third grade, that, you know, you learn to read so you can read to learn, right? So the goal in general is get students so that they are able to read by about third grade. And then they can, from that point on, use that reading to expand their knowledge about just about everything. And so one of the things that I think is important in presenting these types of books and these opportunities for students is to talk about, like, how are students going to continue to learn things about finances as they go on. So once they're out of your class, once they're out in the real world, how do they plan to learn about things that maybe are complex or new, or, you know, something that they want to learn about? And so certainly we live in a, you know, short snippet podcasts and, you know, YouTube, and we're going to actually talk about some of these on our next webinar, you know, the power of TikTok and others for, you know, learning about financial literacy. But there's a lot to be said for getting a good old-fashioned book, being able to, you know, go through it chapter by chapter. Some of these even have workbooks that accompany them. So I like to think about this as presenting students with a way to not only capture the information that's in the book that they're reading, but be thoughtful about, you know, and remember and think back to this experience as, hey, you know, now I've got money, I really am thinking about investing. Maybe I should go, you know, pick up a book and read about it. So, or download one on my phone, what have you. So just a little plug for that. As you guys can see from my bookshelf, I'm still a fan of having hard copy books. I do read and listen to books, but I find, especially for things like this, where I want to learn about something, that I tend to make notes or flag things or turn corners on pages. So anyhow, a couple of our other ones. So these are sort of where we get into a variety of ones that are maybe in some cases sort of targeted towards a specific audience. The one over here on the left is by Beth Copeland. Some of you, I think, have joined us for our book club or book study that we did on Make Your Kid a Money Genius. That was written by Beth Koblinger. So this is a book that she wrote called Get a Financial Life, Personal Finance in Your 20s and 30s. So this is a fantastic, by the way, if anybody is considering, and I would encourage you to think about this, if you ever think about giving gifts to graduates, high school graduates, college graduates, some of these ones that are intended for young adults are a great one to give. The Automatic Millionaire is focusing on investing. There's some other ones by David Bach that are very focused on specific sort of audiences like women and what have you. I love some of the catchy titles on some of these. How to Be Richer, Smarter, and Better Looking Than Your Parents. So that's another one that sort of, I think, can catch the eye of some students and might be intriguing to them. I think it's fascinating, like if you put these all on a shelf, a bunch of books on a shelf, which ones, students gravitate just like the rest of us do when we're at a bookstore or someplace else, just by what's on the cover and the title of the book. So that's a sort of interesting one. One of the things that I think is also great that you can do, and I'll have a slide on this in a few minutes to reinforce it, but I encourage with any book, or you can do this as sort of an assignment or an approach to doing these, is to think about the person who wrote it. So there's a couple of things when it comes to that. What is their background? Is this somebody who's, say, a certified financial planner or a CPA? Are they an investment advisor? Do they come to this from learning about things, maybe the hard way, and they are trying to change things or make things better for other people? Do they have sort of other interests? What else is it that they're conveying? And do they have certainly some maybe strongly held beliefs that can sort of influence what they're sharing with participants? So I have found that Dave Ramsey is probably one of those figures, those authors, those individuals out there in the world of personal finance, where people tend to have some really strong opinions. And so Dave Ramsey in particular has an approach or philosophy about credit that is very different than others. This whole notion that debt is bad in pretty much all forms. Dave Ramsey is absolutely a staunch advocate for basically having zero credit, not using credit cards. And so that is sort of a point of view. I don't want to necessarily say bias, but it's definitely a strong point of view for him as an author for students to understand. And it can be really fascinating, I think, for students to take a topic. And we'll talk about this again in a little bit, this idea of you don't have to read the whole book. You could have students read just about certain topics from different books and see how do these different authors talk about the same concept, right? And, what is it that one says versus another? And so Dave Ramsey, I don't know if any of you are familiar with or big fans of the FIRE movement. So FIRE, you can see here at the bottom, stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, right? So this is this whole notion of trying to maximize your income, really decrease your expenses, save and invest at the absolute extreme possible, so that you can retire very, very early. Like we're talking like in your 30s, certainly by the time you're 50, for most of the individuals that are sort of part of this FIRE movement, if you will. So this book sort of explains a lot of that and comes to things with that sort of notion in mind. Susie Orman is just an example of somebody who's been on a lot of media and has certainly a whole following there as well, and sort of an interest in things from that regard. So those are some of the sort of like traditional folks that have been out there for a while, especially Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman and David Bach previously and some of the others. We now are seeing a whole host of books being put out by individuals who, for the most part, started out as bloggers. And so like we see, for example, here in the middle, Tiffany Alish is known as the Budgetnista. We see her on like morning shows and others talking about how to handle money. The Broke Millennial is another one. Clever Girl Finance is a website turned book, or a series of books. Actually, I think there's 3 books in the Clever Girl series. And Broke Millennial has some others as well. Broke Millennial takes on investing, I think, and another one about conversations and things to talk about. So this is these are great. They're written for the most part by people who are a little bit younger. And again, it's interesting to see what their backgrounds are and how they've come to things, and take that into consideration when reading what they are putting forward. Turning a little bit to books that are just written specifically to zero in and target younger people. So a lot of times it's sort of teens and young adults kind of lumped in there together. So More Money, Please, The Financial Secrets You Never Learned in School. This How to Adult Personal Finance for the Real World. I've seen a lot of teachers, this book, if you're also a member of the Finlit Fanatics group on Facebook, this book has been talked about quite a bit over there. Winning the Money Game, a rule book to achieving financial success for young people. All of these are sort of targeted specifically at teens. So if you're looking at having books that you think your students might be interested in for themselves right now, this kind of category is probably where you want to start. Some additional books in this category: I Want More Pizza, Real World Money Skills for High School, College, and Beyond. Why Didn't They Teach Me This in School? 99 Personal Money Management Principles to Live By. There's a companion to this one that's more just about other sort of real world life skills, but this one is all specific to personal finance. This one has a workbook that goes with it that students can download. Similarly, this What I Wish I Knew at 18 also has a student guide that is a companion piece. So those are both things that you could either think about having all of your students have one of those workbooks or guides, or just buy a copy of each, and see if there's things from the workbooks or from the student guides maybe that you want to adapt and use in your classroom. How many of you are familiar with Gene Natali? And he's an author of both of these books, The Missing Semester and The Missing Second Semester. He's based in Pittsburgh. He's presented at the National Jumpstart Conference, done some things with NGPF and the Allegheny Intermediate Unit, IU1, out in Pittsburgh. So anyhow, Gene has written, he started out with this book, The Missing Semester, and then followed that up with The Missing Second Semester. And these are books that are commonly used by educators in the classroom. I would encourage you, by the way, if you're thinking about, so Gene's a good one, and there's a number of these other authors as well. If you're looking at doing a classroom set, I would always encourage you to go and see if the publisher or the author is willing to cut you a deal on that sort of thing. So just know that if you're trying to buy something in bulk, 25, 30 copies maybe or more of the same book, consider reaching out to the author and or the publishing house and see if they would be willing to give those or provide some type of discount for you on those on a bulk purchase, if you will. Here's some other ones. So I talked about that the FIRE movement earlier. This First to a Million is a teen version of that. So when they talk about being a FI freak on the front page, that's what they mean, the financial independence. So that one is going to focus again with sort of that sort of school of thought. If you're familiar with the Motley Fool, this is an investment guide for teens. I love a couple of these are sort of trying to get folks to think that they're better off than their parents. So 8 steps to having more money than your parents ever dreamed of, right? And I'm sure all of us wish if we had looked back at our own personal situation, thought, man, if I had started investing when I was 17, 18 years old, first time I got my first paycheck or what have you, I'd be in a much better position right now. And so that's exactly what kids can do if they start now, and they can all be better off than their parents, than we are. So similarly, I mentioned that Rich Dad, Poor Dad. A lot of people like that book. And here's one that's specifically for teens: The Secrets About Money That You Didn't Learn in School. So there's a recurring theme here, right? Like that, all the stuff your parents didn't teach you or that you never learned in school. Now, if you're teaching courses in personal finance, your students are learning it, but we can reinforce this stuff because lots of students aren't or adults haven't. So now these I've mentioned, so I have like this ongoing, this I run out of room on my bookshelf from time to time. And part of that challenge is because there's always something new coming out, right? So as I was searching for links and grabbing links to all of these, Amazon loves to tell you, you might also want to think about these. So 2 new books, Financial Adulting. I just added it to my own personal cart. Everything You Need to Be a Financially Confident and Conscious Young Adult. This was just released this month. And coming out later this month, Launching Financial Grownups. Live Your Richest Life by Helping Your Almost Adult Kids Become Everyday Money Smart. So I think this one's more, it sounds like it's more for parents. And I do like a lot of the other books that are focused on parents and what they can be thinking about. So those are, again, it's always new, something always new coming out. And so, as soon as I put together a list, it'll be outdated. So let's sort of change from teens and adults to some younger kids. And for those of you who teach at the high school level, don't tune me out because I'll mention this again on another slide later, but older kids still like books for kids. You can have high school seniors. I know high school AP Econ teachers that use books like Berenstain Bears Get the Gimmies, or the Mad Toy Craze is a fantastic one for talking about supply and demand. So you can use these kids books in your high school with your high school students. They're not off-putting at all. They make it totally easy to understand. You can take a group of books like this with high school students and say, okay, I want you to go through this book and say, which one do you think, let's put together a list of books for the elementary or middle school librarian that we think that they should be considering. So I want you guys to review these books and tell me which ones you think would be the best ones for students of that age. So you can kind of be coy about it, and have them tell you why. And we'll talk about some other ideas here in a minute with some of these picture books in particular. Chapter books. So one of the things that I think is great, these are not necessarily ones that you would have high schoolers read. You could, but these are intended more for sort of upper elementary, early middle school ages. But these are books that you might already have, educators might already be using, and can certainly expand upon the personal finance content that's in each of them. And again, these are great fun books that a lot of students have read already just because they enjoyed them. Lunch Money over here, best-selling author of Frindle. You may read Frindle. My kids and I did that one as an audiobook once in the car. Fantastic books. And yes, Gary Paulson is a wonderful author there, Aaron. I totally agree. Lemonade War is a series. I think there's 4 or 5 books now in that series. So a bunch of really good ones. These are some of my absolute personal favorites. If I had to pick and choose, or if you said I could only keep a couple of the books on my shelves, these would definitely be on there. A Chair for My Mother, as well as one of the follow-ups to that, are some of my one of my favorites. It's about savings. You can also talk about insurance with that, because in the beginning of this, the family has moved in with the parent because their house burned down and they're trying to save money towards a chair. And it just is a really sweet story, and certainly one a lot of elementary school teachers would be familiar with. So if you are working in an elementary school or with younger students, maybe say in like a family and consumer science preschool program or early childhood program, these are fantastic books. to use with young students. They're also, as I mentioned before, great to use with older students. And another thing that you can think about doing, especially, Pennsylvania is filled with school districts where, schools are on the same campus, right? So, maybe your high school is, in walking distance of your elementary school. Consider having some of your high school students go down and do like a story time with some of the elementary kids, and they could read the book in advance, think about some questions that they might want to ask, have them do like some elementary school teachers do and put a post-it note on a certain page, to pause and ask that question, or pose different things as they're reading. It's a great opportunity to do something that's interactive and inner age, and it also give you some great photos that you can post on social media and talk about the great things that you guys are doing and highlight some of the stuff you're doing in your classroom. Knuffle Buddy, which by the way you should be pronouncing the K in that, from Mo Willems, is one of my absolute favorite children's authors. I love it from the whole notion of risk and protecting what we own. So if you're familiar, how many of you know the Knuffle Bunny story? So this one's one where the students, or the little one here, has lost the bunny, and they realized that it was left at the laundromat. So anyhow, I love this book, and it's also set in Park Slope in Brooklyn, where my dearest friends lived for many years, and I just love it. Those Shoes is actually a book that I was introduced to when I'm pretty sure it was when my son was in first grade. It's a fantastic story about a young man who doesn't have the cool shoes, right? And it is just a fantastic story that I think sends both a personal finance message as well as some good sort of SEL components there as well. So those are three that you might want to think about. Oh, and by the way, I mentioned about gift giving. If you have are giving books as gifts to young children or to expecting parents, these are some of my favorite to give as well. One of the things that I love about books is the opportunity to use them to highlight sort of, some diversity. And these three books are great examples of this. Uncle Jed's Barbershop is one that's been around for decades. I lost track of when it was written, but it's just a heartwarming story about an uncle who's an entrepreneur, and the special gift that he gives to on behalf of his niece. Abuela's Weave and One Hen are also fantastic books. One Hen is sort of this whole concept of micro lending. So you can really actually get into some neat things about borrowing and how borrowing looks different from culture to culture. If you have students in your classes, maybe that are, for example, from different Central and South American countries, for example, very often in certain cultures, also in Asian cultures, there's this whole notion of borrowing circles, and how people will save money and borrow from each other in that way. And so this one's about how small loans can make a really big difference, and that whole notion of sort of it could also tie into lessons on giving as well. Donna, great. I've already decided to buy at least 3 of these books. Okay, good. I have a feeling a number of you, I don't mean to encourage lots of spending, by the way. It is a personal finance webinar, but I have a feeling some of you will be doing add to cart. But we'll talk about how you might fund that as opposed to just out of your own pockets in a few minutes. These are some oldies but goodies. Oxcart Man, Bunny Money, and Alexander Who Used to Be Rich Last Sunday. If you're looking for books with full-blown lessons, these are some that you'll definitely find some great ones. Alexander Who Used to Be Rich Last Sunday, I can never even see the front of this book without thinking of my dear colleague Andrew Hill from the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, who frequently does an activity where he stands up on a chair with 100 pennies that are in a that he puts in a piece of tape, a piece of packing tape. I've done this lesson since then and appreciate the time that it takes to put your pennies all into packing tape. I learned that once you do that, you can just tape them back up. You don't have to always redo the whole thing. But anyhow, there's some great lessons and activities out there that you can do with this. You can read Alexander Who Used to Be Rich Last Sunday to a group of high school students and then say, you know, like, how many of you are like Alexander? Like, you get some money and the next thing you do, you turn around and you can't, you know, it's all gone. Right. So it's some of these are just great ways to kick off a lesson in a way that's kind of unpredictable for high school students, and they love it. You know, some of them, they might not say they love it, but they still love it. The other thing is, if you're teaching at the high school level and you're not aware of the fact that probably all of these books, all these picture books are also available, perhaps not the most legal sort of thing to do, but they're all on YouTube with read alouds. So if you search on YouTube for Alexander Who Used to Be Rich Last Sunday, you're going to find some great read alouds of these books. So don't immediately go out and buy all of these. There are ways to get around that. In some cases, in one of those, it's YouTube. So I mentioned Berenstain Bears the other day. I have a host of these books and I absolutely love them. Berenstain Bears, Dollars and Cents, Trouble with Money, Get the Gimmies. I mentioned the Mad Toy Craze. There's Mama's New Job. There's Chores. There's all these different Berenstain Bears books, and they're phenomenal. And I love, even in some of them, I wish I would have grabbed one off my shelf before we started. There's like these little sayings at the beginnings. Even sometimes just the one little saying from the beginning can be like enough to kick off a lesson with students. So these are fantastic. I've got some ideas of other places that you can pick things up, but I have found a bunch of these at like library book sales. So that's one place to pick these up for very little money. You know, if you ever go to like your local public library, they'll have a book sale, and you know, they've got boxes of books out, and half of them are like, you know, 50 cents. I find some of these Berenstain Bears books almost every time I go to one of those sales. So just an idea of a way to get some of these. These are some ones with some popular characters. So we've got Cat in the Hat over here, 1 cent, 2 cent, old cent, new cent. Curious George saves his pennies. Man in the yellow hat. All right, and Just Saving My Money from Mercer Mayer. So again, lots of fantastic books. Some other ones. So those are, you know, books that like were just written and happen to have personal finance themes. These are ones that are written purposely for that. Rock, Brock, and the Savings Shock, along with Isabel's, I had to look at my notes, Isabel's Car Wash, are written, if you notice, does anybody recognize that name, Sheila Bair? Does that ring a bell to anybody? She was the chair of the FDIC, and after finishing her stint as chair of the FDIC, went on to write some of these books because she recognized the importance of financial education and the need for it. So those are both some books that I really like. These books by David Adler are really good. I put this one on there because I need to reread it. And I think some people do about, say right now, gas prices, why they go up and down. So I love how this is like set on a trampoline. So anyhow, that's another good one. The series by Cloverleaf Books, these Money Basics books, there's a bunch of ones in the series. This one's Lily Learns About Wants and Needs. There's a whole bunch of them in that series as well. So just some fantastic books. Free, and you can go and grab it right now. The links for this are in that handout. Are these books from the CFPB, from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So they have this whole series of what they call building block stories. Money Monsters Learn to Save. There's a bunch of different ones that are picture books. They're not traditional picture books. You can't, like, you know, go and buy them at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon, but you can download them or you can request copies of them online. And then this other one, Money Monsters Start Their Own Business, is the first of their chapter books, and I'm hoping that they're going to come out with more of those. They are also all available in electronic book format. So if your school is one-to-one or one-to-many, or however, you know, if you got, you know, a number of iPads or what have you, you can download these into an e-reader. So lots of great books. And again, I have a link to these in the handout. So we see here, they learn to, money monsters learn to save, learn about careers, learn to protect things, learn what things really cost, become good borrowers, learn about giving. So this is an example. This is from the PDF. So again, you can save a tree and just do all this electronically. You could put this up on the screen and read these if if there were things that you wanted. This is another one where if you have high school students that maybe you're going to go down and read to younger students, you could have them preview these on their device, pick which ones they're going to go and read, and they could do it sort of digitally, or they could even zoom into a classroom. You don't actually have to walk over to another building. You can nowadays zoom into an elementary school classroom. So lots of different things that you can think about doing. Here's an example of that. This is really focused on entrepreneurship. Table of contents, in the various chapters with some illustrations. So by the way, entrepreneurs makes me think of another thought. Those of you who do things with entrepreneurship, there's a ton of books out there at various age levels. There are biographies of different entrepreneurs. There's some in that Who Was series, like Who Was Milton Hershey, Who Was Steve Jobs, and so those can make some great connections as well to personal finance. So again, here's some examples of that chapter book. So you've got some books and now you're wondering, how do I use them? So we're going to talk through a few of these. So this is from Kate DiCamillo. She's the author of some great children's books as well. Reading should not be presented to children as a chore or duty. It should be offered to them as a precious gift. And so one of the things to think about when you're doing this is how do you make these books available that they aren't necessarily just something I have to read, right? And so I want to suggest a couple of different things that you can do with students. So we talked about learning a topic. Books are a great thing for students to do things that are on their own. So maybe you pick a topic and say, hey, I'm not going to teach about this. I want you to go and pick a book and learn about it that way. And then we're going to talk about it. Or it might be an alternative to how you present information. You could do something as a pre-learning activity where students maybe say, read a chapter, and then they come into class and then you have a conversation or a discussion about it. You can also think about having these books, like say, so for some students say, hey, I've got these books and you can read this chapter from this book, this book, this book, or this book. Or you could watch these YouTube videos or, do this online self-paced interactive, whichever one of these, formats works best for you, do that, and then come to class and be prepared to talk about, the topic or dive into it or answer these types of questions. So different ways that you can think about this. I also think these are great for diving deeper into a content area. Maybe it's something that students, maybe not every student is interested in that topic. I didn't include any slides in the deck on this, but there are any books on this in the slides. But say, for example, students are interested in cryptocurrency. There are now, there is, what is it called? Like Bitcoins for babies. Like there are babies books now about crypto, which makes me nervous. Quite frankly, I was on a webinar just yesterday with the Financial Literacy and Education Commission, and had folks from FDIC and Treasury and the OCC and all these different organizations. And they were, it was really fascinating as they were talking about crypto and this need for crypto literacy, but also about how many people have made themselves experts, so-called experts, and they're overconfident. So some of their, the federal government, some of the work that they've been doing around this is that a lot of people think they know a lot about cryptocurrency, and yet when they take a test on it, they don't do very well. So their perceived knowledge can be very higher. So anyhow, it's always can be a double-edged sword, but I would certainly err on the side of people knowing and understanding more before diving into things like that. So I talked about earlier this whole notion of sort of understanding the author, right? So you could have students look at different things, look at an author, before they read things or after they've read things, look into their experience and their background. This is whether they're reading a book or whether they're reading something on a blog or from social media. What is that person's point of view? Why did they write it? The book that they did. I like doing things where students look at things like, say, for example, credit. Dave Ramsey looks at credit one way. The points guy, who is all about maximizing and like using your credit card for every single possible thing so that you get as many points as possible, they view credit cards very differently, right? And so, looking at those and comparing and contrasting can be really, really interesting. Jennifer has a comment. I've used younger children's books with middle schoolers, junior high students, where I read them the book. Then we have a discussion that is much deeper than any discussion with an elementary class about the book and an activity. Even the younger student books can be used with older adults if it makes a good point. Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. And and feel free to follow up with that. But I think sometimes when you introduce a topic with something that's just like, I mean, Berenstain Bears, right? Like that's not off-putting, that's not scary, right? So like if you can find ways to do that with students, you've got it. Yeah, Donna says, I love those moments when you really have their undivided attention. I mean, how many high school juniors or seniors there have a teacher that pulls out a children's book and reads to them? I mean, my kids would flip out, like they would love it, right? Everybody loves to be read to. So and by the way, that's another thing you can do with these books, and I've got it on another slide here, I'll get to it in a minute, but doing these as read alouds, and not just the ones that are meant for kids. So individual students is another one of those where you can really do it as an invitation, as a gift to students. So hey, you finished early, grab a book off the shelf and read for a few minutes. Your high flyers that want to dig in and go more in depth and do things that maybe are at a higher level. Talk to your gifted coordinator in your school. Think about ways that they might be able to do an independent study with you, where they really self-direct their own education and learn something in a much more in-depth way, through reading and online research, and maybe come up with a report, or maybe they turn around and share that knowledge with other students in the class or with others. You can set this up as a lending library so that students check things out, and when they're interested, they take it out and they bring it back. So there's lots of ways to use these different books in their classes. There's certainly lots of ways to do things like student book reviews. One of my favorites is to have students read, lots of different students read, or each one read something different, and then share with the class what they liked or didn't like. And again, it doesn't have to be the entire book. We're not talking about making students spend 13 hours reading a big, huge, long book. You could ask them to read a chapter. Maybe it's on a specific topic, and report back. Did the first chapter make them want to read the rest of it, right? Why or why not? You can do book clubs, so you can get small batches of books, so that a group of 4 or 5 students are all reading the same book, and they get together and have conversations about it. Frequently referred to in elementary schools as like a literature circle. If you do a Google search on like modern book reports, there's 1,000,001 different ways to report back on a book. Everything from creating a video, or making a portion of it into a graphic novel. There's so many different cool things that you can do instead of just the traditional book reports that some of us might moan and groan about when we think about them. You can do, like I mentioned before, comparing and contrasting how different authors deal with different things, and certainly classroom discussions. So they can really be a launching pad or a springboard for some of these things. Reading without reflecting is like eating without digesting. So this is a quote from an Irish statesman, Edmund Burke, but I thought that was an interesting one. Like, it's one thing to read it, but a lot of times we read something and it sort of goes, in one ear and out the other. We listen, or, sort of just is there and then it's gone. So taking the time to digest it and reflect on it. So here are some different questions. What made you choose this book? What did you learn about X, whatever the topic is? How can you apply this to your own life? What will reading this book make you do or think about differently? Some of these are some nice higher order thinking skills as well. So it would be a great opportunity for students. I mean, a lot of times, you want to see if a kid read a book, so you might have some of those like recall questions, but really, try and aim for some things that are much more higher level for your kids. Do you agree with the author's point of view? How does this author's presentation of a topic compare to another source? Who should read this book and why? And the answer might be nobody. It was awful, or my parents, or there's all sorts of different ways that that students could answer this. You could do this too, by the way, with those children's books. Like, hey, did you like read this and think about it now? Like, did you ever read this book as a kid? Maybe I'd share with my mother, or share from my mother. Did you ever think about that? Or do you think kids should read this? And if so, what conversations, should they have? Or if you were the parent and reading this book with your kids, what questions would you use to follow up, and what lesson would you hope that they would take from it? So some really fun things that you can do with these. By the way, here's an article from just January of this year about a high school teacher in New York who has done a book club, and they are doing The Psychology of Money, which is another fantastic book that focuses on behavioral finance. So some of you did our dollars and cents book study. The Psychology of Money has come out since then, and it's another great one on that topic. Consider a few things. First of all, pre-read what you've got. At the very least, do a pretty good, skim of it to make sure that none of the content is going to be objectionable. Do a little search online to make sure you're not going to have parents that are, sending you nasty grams. Always think about audiobooks. So, for example, I mentioned YouTube earlier. Some of these books have entire read-alouds on them, even the ones that are meant for adults. There are a lot of kids. I know my son in particular is one that he loves having both the book itself and the audio on at the same time. These may be available, through your public library, or your own school library might have some ideas about ways to access the audio books and other ways to access the books themselves. We talked about the chapter versus the whole book, and some of these others that read aloud. So there's a couple of these books, by the way, that that one that I just mentioned, The Psychology of Money, which I have here somewhere in my stack. It has 19 short chapters. This, I know a lot of teachers are using, and they'll do this as a whole class read aloud. So they will read a whole chapter in a class period and then use that for a discussion. So if you think about sort of, matching some of these up with some of the topics in your class, or you could record yourself doing it, have students listen to it before they come to class, and then be ready for discussion. So lots of different ways that you can think about that. Think about after school opportunities, and don't hesitate to reach out to your ELA colleagues, your English teachers, elementary school teachers, and others might have some other great ideas, or they may even have some books that they would like to think about, or you can have some of these books be read in an English class and do some things collaboratively. By the way, they sometimes have money in their budgets to buy books that might not already have in your budget. So another way to think about funding these. So again, audiobooks for read alouds, YouTube, think about some of these short chapters as well as those. We've talked about picture books, using them to introduce them, having older students create a lesson for younger students, and then coordinating with younger classrooms. There's all of these books and more in our new online catalog. So check out over in your chat. Kevin's going to be sharing you a link to a resource that's from a website that I started using a while back to try and track this collection that I have called Libib. So I have it both on a website, plus I have the app on my phone where I can scan with my camera. I can scan with the app on the barcode, and it automatically populates. It's fantastic. So anyhow, this has over 331 books in total. So you can search here, and you can search the name, you can search or go through alphabetically, or I have them in different catalogs. If you do a search, just to forewarn you, because of the way Libib works, I have to put it in both a specific collection if I want and into that all books. So every book will show up twice. So I just apologize. It's like a little quirk of the system. But you can go in and look, for example, this is in the picture books. I also have one that's specifically on books for parents. I didn't have those in the slides earlier, but there's a whole section of books. There's not a ton of them. I've got 10 in there right now, but these are books for teacher or books for parents. So you might consider, hey, parents, are you interested in learning more about this topic that we've been talking about in class? Here's a few books. And by the way, if you want to borrow one from my collection, you're more than welcome to, or what have you. So you click on them, you should find, a detailed information if it's available. It pulls in the Lexile level, so you can see what the reading level is of these, and then some additional descriptions. These are all, again, pulled in from like a database. So a couple of them are blank on the description. I apologize in advance if you happen to find one of those, but a great resource. We're going to be adding this to our website, so you guys are the first ones to see it, and I hope that you have some great experience with it. If you have feedback, if you think that there's a book that I don't have on one of these lists that you think would be fantastic to add, please let me know. Shoot me an email. Let me know what you think. There's a bunch of other sources for books and resources. So I have links to these in your handouts. These are some lesson plans based on children's books from the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. There's some different books of sort of best books of 2022. These are for teens, for children. Overall, you're going to see a couple of these are ones that you saw earlier. This is from parents, so lots of different ones. So let's turn to, in our last few minutes here, building your library. First off, create a list of the books you want. Come up with their titles and the authors, the number of ones that you want, and the cost per book. Prepare a description of your proposed collection or library. What are your goals for it? How will it be used? Once you've got that list, think of some different sources for funding. I'm going to share a bunch with you. And then also think about ways to acknowledge or recognize your donors. So you can think about like printing out some labels and using them as book plates that says, this book was donated by X. Social media, thank you notes from students, local news stories. I love it. I've donated to different friends' classrooms, like Donors Choose and other wish list purchases. And my favorite way to be acknowledged for anything, if I go into a classroom and volunteer, is a picture of those kids. And that's I think you can never go wrong with those. So sources of funding, we're probably at or at the end of the possibility of getting things into this upcoming school year's budget, but definitely something to think about. Go talk to your administration. Say, hey, I just attended this webinar. I've got some great ideas. I'd really like to get some of these books to have some, room in the budget, or in the other part. So the nice thing is, you might be depends on where your school is in their budgeting process. You may be able to get it in for next year, but you might also be able to go to your administrator and say, hey, is there any money left over here as we get close to the end of the year? I have this idea and I would love to get some of these books. I could read some of them over the summer and be able to share them with students next year. So think both, sort of forward and backwards thinking in that. Ask if there's any like special funds that might be available. So if you're in a CTE program, especially think about Perkins money. Go make friends with your librarian, who likely has a budget every year for books that they can purchase. So, talk to them about maybe the books won't live in your classroom, but maybe there's a special shelf over in the library. Think about book sales and other places. This one is, never underestimate the power of a PTO, PTA, or school foundation. A lot of them run grant programs, as well as some of the like community foundations that you can apply to for, to do these types of things. I was PTO president for many years, and we started a grant program for teachers where, if they had a great idea and needed funding outside of the normal school funding process, we would do those. Our current school district has a fantastic foundation that does those for teachers. In addition to those, financial institutions in particular in your community would love to fund something like this. So if you say, hey, I've got all of these books and I'm going to go to XYZ Credit Union and ABC Bank, and I'm going to ask a bunch of them to, chip in, a certain amount of money. You can, ask them for a specific dollar amount. You can say, hey, I wanted to make you aware that I've got this wish list on Amazon, and, we'd love it if you would support it. And for every book that you donate, we'll put this sticker on the inside of it, and and make sure that you're acknowledged. Donors Choose, I actually did a search there the other day. There aren't any projects like this right now. There have been in the past, but there's not any active that I could find. So Donors Choose is a great place to go and put up requests. I mentioned Amazon wish lists. I know a lot of folks share those, within their community. By the way, there's a great idea of sort of making these as leave behinds from former students. So, put something out to current parents and students, asking them to consider making a donation and recognizing your child or their child in that. Public libraries, I mentioned their library sales earlier, but sometimes they, before putting them out to a sale, you can work with them sometimes to get those directly donated. Always discuss any requests that you're going to be doing for fundraising with your administration first. You don't want to get in trouble with them not knowing that you're going, say, to a bank or a credit union. A lot of times, though, they will give you a letter on school letterhead that explains what it is and sort of validates that this is a legitimate request. So that's another thing that you can think about. Maybe have your students come up with a cool name. Use your students, get them to create some social media posts, have them do a letter to the community to request these partners and also to thank them. Lots of different places. We mentioned some of these as places to go and shop for some of these. I found these books at yard sales and other places as well. And then last but not least, let us remember, one book, one pen, one child, and one teacher can change the world. So just a little inspiration here to finish this webinar out. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that we've inspired you to change the world one kid at a time, one book at a time.